Hi, my name is Tracey Phillips, and I'm a Level 2 autism teacher with Stafford County Public Schools. Today, we are going to be presenting using visual supports to teach students with ASD. I will be presenting first, and later on you'll hear from my colleagues Nancy Sorrentino and Amy Horne. The purpose of visuals in your classroom. The following are just a few of the reasons you should use visuals in your classroom. 1, to promote and aid communication. To aid instruction, to help promote and build independence, clarify boundaries, minimize auditory distractions, and to create predictability and lessen anxiety. When working with students with autism, it's important to understand that there are 5 levels of communication. They are as follows from highest to lowest. Verbal, students at this level are able to communicate and express themselves using words. Written, these students understand written language and are able to write to communicate. Symbols, students at this level are able to understand what symbols represent when communicating. Pictures, students at this level require actual pictures of what it is you are trying to communicate. And object level, these students are your lowest students and they require actual objects of what it is you are trying to communicate for them. One of the reasons that it's important to understand levels of communication is that during stressful times, students on the autism spectrum tend to regress 1 to 2 levels of their communication. For instance, a student who is a verbal student on a typical day, during times of frustration or anxiety, may regress down to having to require symbols in order to communicate what he's thinking and feeling. Your classroom environment. Although the type of system that you use in your classroom will vary depending on the levels and needs of your students, these are the areas that you want to consider when organizing your classroom. Physical organization, schedules and routines, work systems, and visual structure. During my presentation, I will be discussing physical organization, work systems, and visual structure, and Amy Horne will be talking about schedules and routines later on in the presentation. Physical organization. When creating the areas within your room, you need to consider the needs of your students. We're going to look at a couple examples of different areas you may want to put in your classroom. These will all depend on what you feel meet the needs of your individual students. Independent work areas. Every student, regardless of their ability level, needs to have an independent workspace. How this workspace looks will depend on the level of your student. Some students may require a simple desk in the room. Other students may require a more structured environment like the one that's in this picture. You want to have a place where you can implement your direct individual instruction. This is my one-to-one station in my classroom, and all of my students receive their direct instruction at this table. My students rotate through this station several times throughout the day. You really want to have a place where you can provide their instruction in an organized manner. Group instruction. This is another area you really want to consider having in your classroom. It's an ideal time to teach students social skills and also work on behaviors such as sitting down, taking turns, and attending to a task. Play area. Depending on the needs of your students, it may be completely appropriate to have a play area included in your classroom. Computer. Again, depending on the needs of your students, it may be a nice area to have in your classroom where they can earn choice time or do individual work on the computer. Reading corner. One of the reasons that I put this slide in the presentation is not only is it an area you really want to consider having in your classroom, but it's a great example of using visuals to promote independence among your students. The teacher who used this system actually went through and leveled all of her books according to reading level. She then assigned each level a color, blue, yellow, and red. She gave each student an assigned color, and they knew what color belonged to them, so when she told them to go pick a book for reading, they were able to independently go to the bookshelf and find a reading book on their instructional level without having to bother a teacher or ask for help. Creating boundaries. It's important to have visual boundaries in your room so students have a better understanding of their environment. You can create physical boundaries in a variety of ways. All of the examples that I'm about to show create a visual boundary to help my students understand the separate spaces within my classroom. Using furniture and walls. As you can see in this picture, I use a filing cabinet and 2 teacher desks to provide a secure, defined space for these 2 individual students. In this picture, the student in the back requires a more defined, structured space. By using the walls that create the corner, I can give her an area where there's a lessened amount of visual and auditory distractions, and it helps keep her calm when she's doing her independent work. This shows an example of using a wardrobe closet to create a second wall. This also helps to create a nice space that separates 2 students who may interact with each other during independent work time. The shelf on the left also serves as a half wall and is a space where we can store her independent work activities. Using mats. I love using mats in my classroom as a way to teach students specific space and where their personal space begins and ends. At group time, this shows the students where they need to keep their materials and where they need to stay when they're working. It's also a great idea to use them during snack time so that students aren't invading their peers' space and they learn how to manage their materials in an organized way at the snack table. Tape on the floor. I use tape on the floor to create boundaries where I don't have something like furniture or a wall so that students know where they need to stay in a selected space. I will warn you that if you're going to use tape on a rug, you will want to pick it up every once in a while because after a few months it will actually get ingrained in the carpet. And you want to make sure you can tear it off easily at the end of the year. Lesson learned. In this space, the tape provides an area the student knows where he needs to stay when he's doing playtime during his choice activity. In this picture, you can see an example of how I used tape to show a student where his boundaries were at his independent workstation. This student didn't need the structure of walls or furniture, but he did need to know where his space began and ended so that when he was doing his independent work, he knew that he couldn't wander the room. This area here was for safety. This is an actual lane that my students use when they are using the scooter during choice time. I don't want my students wandering and using the scooter all over the classroom, and this lane shows them exactly where they need to stay to be safe while using the scooter. Work systems give your students a visual strategy to approach the work that needs to be done. Your students should be able to answer each of the following questions at all times during independent workstations. What work do I have to do? How much do I have to do? When will I know I am finished? And what do I do next? It's important to note that when you are implementing work systems in your classroom, these are things that need to be taught to your students. It is not something that they will know how to use automatically right from the start. They need to be taught how to use a system effectively. The first type of system is a written system. A written system can be something as simple as a checklist or a written list that a student goes down. These are examples. The one on the left is an example of a written schedule and checklist that also incorporates visuals. The one in the center bottom is a checklist that a student used to teach them the steps necessary to pack up at the end of the day. Written file system. This is an excellent system to use for a higher functioning student. Different subject areas are labeled on the files in written form, and when the student comes in, they know where to find the work that needs to be completed. This picture shows another example of a file system, but instead of using written words, the student is using a matching system. The student matches the symbol on the mini schedule located on their desk to the file folder that has the same number. This tells them what work they need to do at that particular time. Here's another example of a matching system using drawers. Same system where the student matches the number on the mini schedule to the drawer, and that tells them what work needs to be completed at that independent workstation. This is another example of a matching system using drawers, but the drawers are larger. You may use bigger drawers for students that don't have the great fine motor skills or for students who are using hands-on materials to complete an activity. Here's an example of using bins as a matching system. Student will check their schedule and take the matching symbol over to the bin, and whatever work is in that bin is the work they need to complete at that workstation. The left to right system is a system you would use for your lowest functioning students. These students that use a left to right system are just learning how to work independently in a classroom and may not be able to visually discriminate or match items at this time. They learn that the items that are placed to the left in a basket is the work that needs to be completed. When they are finished with the task, they then place it in a bin or basket on the right. Anything that's in that left bin is what needs to be completed, and when the bin is empty, the work is complete. This is another example of a left to right system. When doing work systems, it's important for students to know when they are finished. This looks different depending on the level of system that you're using. For a written system, when everything on the list is checked off or removed, they know they're complete. For a matching system, when all of the symbols or pictures that they're matching are gone and the list is empty, they know they're completed. On a left to right system, as said earlier, when everything on the left is gone, they know they've done that completed task. All these serve as a visual cue that the work has been completed. It's important for our students to know, what do I do next? Many of the students on the spectrum don't know what to do with free time or understand how to transition from one activity to the next, and using visuals to help with this is really important. By providing a visual of what happens next, it helps to lessen anxiety and serve as a motivator for completing the work. When possible, try to use visuals that are written, picture, or object of activities that the student prefers or enjoys. On the right, you see a simple first-then board. In the left column, the first column, you see the work that needs to be completed. In the right column, the then column, you can use a visual of a choice activity. In this particular situation, I just put a blanket choice picture, but you can use something more specific to that student if it's appropriate. What do I do next? At my individual workstations for my students, I've created a little visual that says, what do I do next? And I put the picture of what comes next or their nameplate telling them to check their schedule on that board. My students are taught that when they complete their work, they need to look up there to the visual to find out what they need to do next. Same thing at my one-to-one tables. If you see down in the corner, it's another little board that says, what do I do next? And there's a nameplate there that tells that student when she's finished her work, she needs to go check her schedule. You can also use activities or choice pictures as well. Visual structure. Having visual structure in your room provides a presentation of information for students to help them maneuver throughout this classroom and school and go through their day with as much independence as possible. It also gives clarity and organization to their day. Visuals designate various areas in your room and school. Here's an example of using written words to organize classroom materials. By doing this, students know exactly where to find what they need throughout the school day and can be more independent rather than seeking out adults to help them get materials. This is an example of a closet that I have in my classroom. All of my choice activities are located inside that closet. The pictures outside represent the toys that are inside. I have a choice board in my classroom that also have matching pictures for each of those activities. When my students make a choice, they go to the choice board, select the picture they want, and then basically sign out the toy that they're using by matching it to the picture on the door. This provides me a way of knowing what toys are out at any point during the day, and it also makes the students responsible for choosing their own activities and then cleaning up at the end of their choice time. When they're finished, they have to put the toy away, remove the picture, and put it back on the choice board. Individual work areas. All of my individual work areas have those little bins that are designated by the arrow on the right-hand picture. All of my students are assigned a symbol at the beginning of the year, and when they see that symbol on their schedule, they know they have to report to their workstation to complete a work task. I also have those same bins for every activity and area in my classroom. In this picture, you can see bins for my one-on-one instruction table and my group table. These bins have pictures or symbols on them representing that activity. Those same pictures are located on my students' individual schedules. When they see that on their schedule, they need to take that picture and transition to that specific space in the classroom. This has really helped to decrease the amount of prompting and adult support during transitions in my classroom because my students know exactly where they need to go and what needs to be done in that area. I also use those same bins for activities outside the classroom. My students know when they leave the room, they need to put their specific picture from their schedule in one of these bins, letting us know where they're going at that particular time. As well as being assigned a symbol, my students are also assigned a color at the beginning of the year. This is extremely helpful for students who may not be able to recognize their own name or read. They are able to learn their specific color. So when they see these nameplates, they know that that represents them. I use these specific nameplates for transitions throughout the day, but I also use them for this lunch choice. My students know when they come in to find their color and make their specific lunch choice. But these nameplates are also used throughout the day. Whenever I need my students to check their schedule, they're handed a nameplate and they know they need to go straight to their individual schedule to see what they're doing next. This has really helped to decrease the amount of talking and noise in my room because my students see the visual nameplate instead of being prompted verbally to go check their schedule. And it's made a huge difference in my room as far as noise and independence with my students. That is the end of my section, and now you will hear from Amy Horne, who will be going over communication and schedules and routines.
Hi, I'm Amy Horne, and I'm an autism coordinator at Stafford County Public Schools, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about schedules and routines, and then communication. Schedules and routines are important in a classroom because they're visual cues which let the student know what activities will occur and in what order. It helps to create predictability, lessen anxiety, and promote independence. They can be used at any level. Like Tracey talked about, you can use objects, pictures, symbols, or even a written schedule. An object schedule is a selection of objects that visually represent an activity that's going to occur. So for example, you would use a cup to represent snack, a fork for lunch, a paintbrush for art, etc. I have some examples to show you, and they could be presented in a variety of ways. For the top picture, that student just needed one item at a time. So the teacher just put the object in a basket to show what was next. And they grabbed that object and went to the next thing. And when they came back, there was the next object in the basket for them. The bottom picture shows just a short little routine with an object that represents each part of that routine. In this slide, there's a couple different examples, and the bottom one shows a big portion of the day. Sometimes it can be difficult to find objects, but if you take a look at some of these for what the teachers used, one teacher even used the top of a cereal bowl to symbolize breakfast for a student. When you're using pictures or symbols, these are the most commonly used in autism classrooms. You see this a lot. You can use a photograph of where the student should be. So in the left-hand picture, it's an actual picture of where the student is going to be going, and that symbolizes recess. But the right-hand picture also symbolizes recess. You just have to see where your students are and exactly what they need and figure out if they need a combination or just one or the other. This slide shows different ways that pictures or symbols are used on schedules. They can be given in a vertical fashion, a horizontal fashion. They can have multiple students together or just one student by themselves. In the next slide, you can see that a teacher has used a space on their wall for every student in their classroom. And for these students, they flip the pictures over to show that that activity was finished. In the previous slide, you can see that some of them were gone. That's because those students were taking those scheduled pictures and actually bringing them somewhere else. In this slide, we have written schedules, and this one actually has symbols on it as well. You can see the left-hand side doesn't have an area where the student needs to check off anything because that student can kind of handle that kind of schedule. But on the right-hand side, that student needs to check off things as they go so he could see that it was finished. This is a very simple written schedule. Lots of times when teachers ask about using visuals and what do I do if something comes up and I wasn't prepared for it, I just say to grab a whiteboard and write it down. That provides a visual right there on at that moment, and it gives the student a very clear idea of what's coming, what they've done, and what's next. In this schedule, Tracey talked a little bit about color coding in order to differentiate between student, but if you have a student who's spending a lot of time in the general education setting, you can actually color code their subject areas. So you can see in the left-hand schedule, that student their times were color coded by classroom. So they knew if they saw red, they went to one classroom, and blue, they went to another. And the code is there on the bottom just in case he needed it. The student on the right, we actually color coded his subject areas for him. So you can see that language arts was green. Not only was it green on his schedule, but all of his binders and folders and notebooks were also green. So he didn't have to think about what he needed to grab for each class as he went. With schedules and routines, it's important to remember that when you individualize a student's schedule, you have to consider their individual level of understanding. These are some things to consider when you're doing that. What type of visual cue are you going to give the student? Do they just need a written schedule? Do they need pictures, objects, or some kind of combination of a few different ones? Are you going to give them the full day schedule all at once, or are you going to give them a partial day? In addition, maybe they just need one thing at a time. How will it be organizationally sequenced? Will it be from left to right or top to bottom? And then how will the student check their schedule? That's all part of your classroom routine. So will the student have a timer, and when the timer goes off, it's time to check their schedule? Will there be a verbal prompt? One idea that Tracey had in her presentation was using a name card. You saw in those pictures that all the name cards had a separate color for each student, and when the staff members handed the students a name card, that was their prompt to check their schedule. Using that kind of system really reduces the amount of verbal prompts that are going on all at once in the classroom, and it reduces all that dinging from the timers. How will the students manage their schedule? Will they mark it with a marker, check it off, turn things over, match items? You have to think about all of those things when you're coming up with schedules and routines. So here's an example of placement of schedules. In this instance, there's 4 students that all go to the same area of the classroom to check their schedules. You can see that there's lots of schedule pictures that are missing, and that's their routine. They take the picture off and they carry it over to the area of the classroom and they place it inside the bins. If you want to see pictures of that, just go back in the slideshow and you'll see lots of bins around the classroom with the matching symbol on it. This particular student needed an individual schedule over in his independent area that he felt most comfortable with. So you can see again, those pictures are gone and they're in the bins, and then you can clearly see what's next in their day. Now I'm going to talk about communication and the use of visuals. With students with autism, they might have difficulty maintaining a conversation. They might talk to a communication partner about a preferred topic for a long time, even if the communication partner isn't all that interested in the topic. They may speak in a monotone way. They may have difficulty determining a level of familiarity with that person. They may have difficulty with natural turn-taking and personal space. I feel like I could list a lot more things on this list, but this is just some of them. This visual shows so many ways in which we can communicate. As teachers of autism, we really need to think about using those visual supports and providing verbal prompting. And some of these ways on this visual we can use as well. So if the student is experiencing a communication breakdown, there might be behaviors that are occurring. Nancy's going to go into a lot more detail with behavior, but for now, just remember that Using different modes of communication with a student is really good, and remember to have those backup visual systems, even for verbal students. Remember that the functions of communication are the following: requesting something, gaining someone's attention, rejecting or refusing something, commenting, giving or seeking information, or expressing feelings. And be sure to know that you might think that a student is trying to do one of those, but it actually might be something else. Some classroom resources that are kind of general are shown on this slide. Tracey talked a bit about the first then board, but that's a really easy way to show a student what they're doing right now and then what's coming next. You can put Velcro on that or some tape, and it's really easy to go with. Lots of times you might not even be prepared with that, but it's a good thing to grab and use when you're trying to communicate something. On the top and in the middle are different ways to keep really common visuals that you use in the classroom. You could put them on a ring and kind of hang them, or keep them on a lanyard like the middle picture. And those are things that staff members use all the time. Lots of times you'll see staff members with pictures like that and they're frayed and used because they use them all the time. Again, you can use a simple whiteboard to communicate something or draw a picture for a student, and that's something that teachers have all the time. An important thing to remember is that students need a way to communicate throughout the day. These can be through the use of either one of these items or a multitude of other ways. The left-hand picture is a PECS book that students might use, and on the right-hand side, there's a simple voice output device that can be used. In the classroom, you definitely want to have things on hand for students to be able to communicate their needs. So when you're having a group activity or a one-on-one session, if a student can't communicate with you what they want, you need to provide them with something. The left-hand side is an example of a communication board that a student can use during an arts and crafts activity. It's very simple. The student can ask for what they want, and they can even ask for which color they want to complete the arts and crafts activity. Another time that's very difficult for staff members in classrooms with students that are nonverbal is when something might be hurting or they're in pain. So it's always good to have something like this on hand. So if you start to see some out of the ordinary behavior with students, you can ask them if something hurts and they'll be able to tell you. Here's some really basic communication examples. On the top, there's a voice output device that you set for students so that all they have to do is push their picture, and then out comes a response for the group that you're having. You can reset this kind of device during the day for multiple times, and the students know that they just have to push on their picture and there's going to be a response. There's a basic yes/no board. Don't forget that your students have to understand what yes and no means, so of course you have to teach that kind of thing beforehand. On the right-hand side is scripting for a conversation that they may have with a peer. And the one on the top left is some simple communication pictures that you might need during the day. Here's just a snapshot of some more advanced options. Some of these might be available on apps or computer programs, but even the one on the bottom right is a pretty advanced system, and it's all paper. You can see there's color-coded tabs on the side, and this student knows exactly where they need to go in order to communicate using that kind of system. Please remember in your classroom that you need to have things available for students in order to communicate with their peers. So if you're playing games in the classroom, they might even be in the general education classroom, you should provide something for that student so they could fully participate in any way that they can. You can see these examples are games like Simon Says or Go Fish. A student should be able to communicate during games like that with peers. And on the right-hand side is a simple conversation visual. One of the most difficult times for teachers is when they're planning events that are out of the classroom or out of the school, such as field trips or school activities. So here are some examples of some things that you might want to create for students. The top one is at a fundraising event at a car wash, things that you can say. Field day is a pretty unstructured day for our students with autism, so having a visual ready for them to know what to expect and then be able to communicate while they're outside during that time so they can fully enjoy the day is something that's needed. We have a grocery shopping list for a trip that you might take out of the school, and even a recipe, having a visual for a recipe so that the student can communicate. It's important to practice in the classroom whenever possible before you leave the room so that the student knows what to expect and what kind of words they might hear. And make sure to bring familiar communication tools with you when you're leaving the classroom. This may mean that it's an old system that the student is really used to and kind of has moved on from, just so that if there's some kind of communication breakdown or even a behavior, you can pull out those very familiar things for that student. It's always important to be ready for the unexpected when you're out of the classroom and out of that familiar environment. Now Nancy Sorrentino is going to talk specifically about behavior.
Hi, I'm Nancy Sorrentino. I'm an autism coordinator with Stafford County Public Schools. Today I'll be speaking to you about behavior and how to utilize visuals effectively to promote positive behaviors. My goal today is to present to you basic but essential points to consider for behavioral visuals. My colleagues, Amy and Tracey, presented their ideas concerning physical structure, visual structure, and communication. These are all very important components of setting up positive behaviors. Sometimes our students' behaviors are a little more challenging and aren't naturally supported through those strategies and suggestions that Amy and Tracey talked to you about. So what we do is we try to individualize a little bit more. An important factor is that when you're using visuals, you need to be very clear on the purpose as well as how the visual is going to be implemented so that you don't elicit negative behaviors or reinforce the behavior that you're trying to replace. To begin with, think about these 3 questions. Identify when visuals are needed. What visuals are appropriate? How visuals will be integrated throughout the day. When you think of those 3 questions or points, think about the students you're working with. If the student is requiring a significant amount of verbal prompting or physical direction or redirection from staff, that is an indicator that a visual may be appropriate. As Amy and Tracey both talked about, we look at reducing distractions and reducing anxiety and tension within the environment. Our students struggle with communication and language. Implementing the use of visuals helps the student organize what we're saying as well as regulates what staff do when they're interacting with our students. As a teacher, a facilitator, an instructor, somebody trying to support positive behaviors, our goal should be to create a tension-free environment, which is going to increase the likelihood that our students can learn what we want them to learn and not use unacceptable or inappropriate behaviors to get what they want. We're going to do this by looking at your room, your instruction, and thinking, no secrets classroom. The student, as well as staff, should be able to walk into a room and know what's happening over here, what's happening over there, what am I supposed to do? No secrets classroom. That's going to reduce anxiety and stress for not only the students, but for the staff trying to facilitate change. Visuals increase learning through the visual channel rather than the auditory. We spoke about too much language is confusing for our students, so we want to be clear and concise. 4 points to consider are expectations clear? Go back to the physical structure, go back to the visual structure, and then think about behavioral structure. Is it clear to everybody what's going on? Which takes us to the staff presentation. Does staff know what's going on? Do they know how to utilize the visuals that you develop? Visuals can build independence. The less talk, the less prompting, the more the student knows what you expect and what is expected in the environment, the more independent they're going to be able to be. Also, the no secrets in classroom is going to reduce the anxiety. If everybody, that includes staff, because I'm a strong advocate that the visuals are as important for the staff as they are for the student. That's how you're going to promote your no secrets classroom. When considering developing visuals, you need to think about the student specific. What level are they at? What's going to be the appropriate format? Do they need objects? Do they need icons? Do they respond best to digital photos? Or do they need written language? These are all very important concepts so that the student understands what's going on. Where are they located? Are the visuals in a central location? Do they need to be in each of the work zones that the student may access? Or can the visual be portable? The student carries the visual. It's either on their schedule, it's in a binder, it may be connected to a little ringlet that's attached to their waist. What's the manipulation skill? What manipulation skill do they require? Is a student going to use a marker to check off the visual? Does the student have the physical ability to move a picture from one side to a finished column? Or move their token from the top to the bottom? Do the visuals answer the following questions? What's expected behavior? What is the expected task? And what is the outcome the student can expect? The outcome the student can expect brings us to motivator. The motivators are so important because you can design the most beautiful visual, beautiful token board, but if the reinforcer that is supposed to be the motivator for the child to practice the desired behavior, then it's not going to work. Most frequently I hear staff say, nothing motivates the child. I don't know what the reinforcer is. And that is a very difficult area. However, we need to take our time to figure that out. Identifying the motivator. There are many tools out there. Reinforcement surveys that are pencil paper type of activities where the child selects what they like, what activities may be motivating for them. It can also be a reinforcement assessment where you're going to sit down one-on-one with the child. You're going to present to them multiple options and see what they choose. You're going to continue that sequence so you can see which are the most likely that they're going to use and that are going to be motivating. Observation, probably the best tool that you can use. Observe students when they're with staff, when they're with other students, when they're on the playground. Input from parents, staff, anybody that comes in to contact with the student. The bus driver is typically a very good resource. They have the child in the less stressful time, talking. Most of our kids like to ride on the bus. So make sure you're accessing everybody. Once you've identified what might be a motivator, you have to teach the motivator sometimes. When we talk about kids on the spectrum, we talk about them not being able to use familiar items in a typical way. So we have to start at square one. You need to teach the student how to use a motivator. After a while, if they don't show interest, then you may want to try something else. But teaching the motivator is key because the visual structure of teaching the motivator is going to transfer into that being the big ticket item when you're implementing behavior strategies and visuals. Which takes us to the reinforcement. And we talked about that the reinforcer needs to be motivating. Now that you've decided what your reinforcer is going to be, you need to think, is it going to be continuous or intermittent? In simple terms, are you going to give the reinforcer on a fixed schedule, such as the first then board, or is it going to be intermittent? Every once in a while, after so many trials or after an activity, you're going to present the reinforcer. Visuals that monitor the delivery. This is very important because we talked about there being continuous or intermittent. When you're first teaching a desired behavior, the child needs to be reinforced as frequently as possible. You got to catch them, you got to motivate them, you got to show them what the payoff is going to be, and it's going to be positive. The simplest monitor of delivery is a first then, and that's a continuous. First, Tracey's going to do this, then you're going to receive this. The next option may be a token board. The token board on this slide is represented to the far right and looks like a traffic light. The student has the opportunity to earn 4 tokens, then a motivator. Daily schedules and agendas. You'll notice the center bottom, that daily schedule, you can adapt it so that you mark on there every second or third picture. There would be a motivator or a choice picture, as Tracey showed you in one of her presentations. And some of our students require a concrete picture of what the motivator is, and some are able to have a simple choice picture so that they can then go practice their independence and choose what they want at the time of the reinforcer being delivered. Checklists. Checklists work very similar to the schedule to the right of that. However, for some of our kids who don't really require the pictures, it can be a written schedule, but you're going to write in when the reinforcer occurs. The importance of this concept of this slide is that whatever you're doing, everybody is aware of. When is the motivator being delivered? What are the expectations? Because if you as a staff can't answer that, then the student can't answer that. And if the student can't answer that, then they're not going to be bought into the system, and they're not going to be motivated to demonstrate the desired behavior. When you're developing visuals, think about the child. Think about how age appropriate it is. This is an example of an agenda type setup. I worked with a young man who was very conscious of carrying around anything different than his peers. So what we did was, this was a token system. He did earn tokens. The bottom indicates 1 through 6, they were periods of the day. And the front cover had the emblem of his school, and it was on a flip type chart system, so it looked like an agenda very similar to what all of his peers were carrying. Some kids may just need a simple I need to earn board, and they're fine with that, but always keep in mind, who are you working with? You want to be very person-centered, and remember dignity, especially when you're dealing with students with behaviors. If they're having behaviors, most likely they're aware of that, and they know their peers are aware of that. They don't need anything else that's going to draw more attention. So respect the dignity and honor for all your students when you're developing your visuals. The most commonly utilized visual for redirecting behaviors is a token board. When you're introducing a token board, you need to start with identifying the target behavior to change. And although I said earlier basic but essential, this frequently is one of the most common problems when people are developing the visuals. Everybody has not agreed on what the target behavior looks like. Behaviors look different to different people. So you need to make sure that if you are utilizing a visual for a specific behavior, that everybody has the same visual in mind. Then you need to identify the motivator or reinforcer, which we talked about, and how important this is. Limit the access to the item selected as a reinforcer. Remember, our kids are very bright. If they know they're going to get it at the end of the day, or that when a particular staff member comes in, they may get a highly motivating object, then it's not going to be that reinforcing throughout the day. When utilizing the token board, remember that you have to teach the concept of how the student uses the token board. The boards that are pictured to the right require 6 tokens. When you're beginning to teach it, you may want to consider giving the child the first 5, they have to earn the 6th. When they earn the 6th, then the motivator is delivered. Then you fade, so they have to earn 2. then they have to earn 3, then they have to earn 4. But you're going to do this at a pace that you're encouraging the behavior and that the student doesn't feel defeated, that they're never going to get the tokens, therefore they're never going to get their motivator. Again, when we talked about consistency within staff, it's important that everybody be delivering the tokens on the same schedule for the same expected behavior. When you deliver the token, pair it with a positive social praise. Hey, way to go, or an action, high five. Because remember, you're going to want to fade this board out, and you want that child to feel good about that verbal praise or feeling good about themselves. This slide gives you a few examples of how you can arrange your token boards. The top left board uses a railroad theme and lists all the possible choices the child can earn. The Hello Kitty board has the tokens on the front, and if you flip it over, it has possible choices on the back. The top right star board lets you know right away what you're going to earn, being the microphone. The bottom left, again, is going to depict your choices, and the bottom right is one that gives more guidance on what the expected behaviors to do or not to do are expected. Again, you need to think about each child. Is that too much visual? Is it not enough visual? Is it not clear enough of what the expectations are? This is another type of token system. It's a level system where the student understands that it's not an all or nothing, that for a certain number of tokens, the child can earn different levels of motivators. That's where it's good to continue those motivational assessment surveys, figure out what the child likes, and then place them strategically on the level system so that the child's working for the most highly desirable item. Okay, you're in that situation, and the child hasn't required a formal approach, a token system. What am I going to do? Sometimes you need to think on your feet on the spot. The top left corner is truly a token system. You use a marker, you're in a classroom, the child's having difficulty, you go over and you give a simple verbal, hey, listen, if you get 4 checks, when we get back to the room, you will get to go on the computer for 15 minutes. The middle is the same thing. Maybe the child needs even a more visual approach or a sticky note, or you're in a classroom where you don't want to write on the tabletop. You just have a sticky note, you put it on there, you've got the same marker system going, or the child really needs that 3, 2, 1 positive. The bottom right is an agenda type of system. If you're in the classroom, they're having trouble, they don't know what's happening, they have an agenda with them. You pull it out, you highlight. If you do A, B, and C, you're going to receive your reinforcer during the highlighted times. Thinking on your feet. Don't avoid addressing a behavior just because you may be in a situation that you don't have your visuals with you. Think about what you can do on the spot. Response cost systems. This is more where the child is, you're removing. Try to stay away from the I'm going to take and you're going to lose, because my question, are those systems motivating or triggers? Sometimes it can be a trigger for a child. However, some students respond positively to, these are my 3 chances. So it's not that it's negative. It's just an approach that gives the child some boundaries, and some of our kids need those. The top left is presented in a very positive way. What the behavior is expected to the left. We have 3 happy smiley faces leading to the motivator. However, if the behaviors on the left are demonstrated, they're going to lose a smiley. When the smileys are gone, the motivator will not be delivered. However, It is important to reset the board so that the child doesn't feel defeated. The problem with response cost systems are that people focus too much on an all or nothing. If you are going to use a response cost system, think about the child. Can they go class by class? Does it have to be reset after every task? What's appropriate? Because the response cost can be effective, but if the duration is too long, you've defeated your purpose. The middle bottom is also earning tickets or taking tickets. Far to the right is the very similar format to the motivator. On the left is a desired behavior, and on the right, you can see where the child can select a motivator and put it on the end. Visuals that teach positive behaviors. Contingency maps are very effective. I like to talk about our students that we refer to as the self-proclaimed police officers that are very quick to point out and indicate what their buddies are doing wrong, but when they have to apply it to their own life, it's very difficult. The contingency map lays it all out. What do we need you to do? If you're not, the result's going to be listed. If you are, the outcome, positive outcome, is going to be listed. I'm a very strong advocate of the contingency map. Also, it very much involves our student in helping develop and design their own contingency map. Setting up for positive behaviors during transition. This happens within the day, one class to another, leaving the self-contained environment to a more inclusive environment. This is an example of a transition book that we developed for a student who was moving from one school to another. So what we did was made up a social story, book form, visual to support the positive behaviors that the child needed to demonstrate. The book familiarized the student with staff, aspects of their day, and what expected behaviors we were working for. One of the pages in the book supports the behaviors. Things I can say and do if I'm mad or if something is bothering me. This was a very strong teaching tool that allowed the student to generate their own ideas, collaborate with staff, and then put them into practice. Cooling down. Cooling down is a process of when our students become agitated, they're anxious, and the behaviors they demonstrate aren't necessarily the most positive. We need to think about how to cool down and how we can help them. What do you think about and what does this mean for cooling down? The length of time a student takes to cool down. What activities do they need to participate in that may help them cool down? And what is the student's physical ability? What do they need to cool down? Time-driven cool down visuals can be very helpful. However, questions to consider: do strategies calm or increase anxiety? Do strategies provide us safe, calming boundaries? Does the student understand how the strategy works? To the right, we have several examples of how you can time a student's cool down period. Disappearing timer, red, yellow, green. To the left top, we have the stop, and those little tabs that are folded down are just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sometimes the student needs that boundary. The same on the bottom left. It's just another stop representation in some way that the student can monitor their own cooling. Maybe they're pulling the flaps down, and that's helping them. Maybe they're pulling the flaps down and they're breathing, or they're singing, whatever is going to help them. But those are tools that you can use to help the student time their cool down. Visuals that guide the cooling down process are important, but again, you need to think about the individual before implementing or designing something. Is the physical activity calming? We hear all the time, he needs to calm down, have him go jump on the trampoline. You need to make sure that the activity you're pairing with the calming down is truly a calming activity and you're not contributing to the student's behavior. Is a visual sequence of activity clear? You know, we have a first I'm going to sit here, then I'm going to move to this section. Whatever the sequence is it clear, and does the student know how to follow the sequence? Are the visuals easy to understand and within the student's physical capability? When you're giving a student, for example, the far to the right, the blowing chart, and as they blow, they're going to pull off the X. Does a child have the physical capability to pull those X's off? Their fine motor seems simple, but that can increase the level of behavior instead of decrease it. The fidget basket. Is there something in the basket that's hard for the child to manipulate? Take that all into consideration. And remember, when they're cooling down, they may not be able to perform the same skills that they typically. So the cooling down process is something that's supposed to relax them, not increase behaviors. Uh-oh. Got it. When the students cool down, we also want to look at visuals that help the student check their emotion and promote self-regulation. We often use visuals to teach a behavior, but then we don't really deal with the root of the problem. What caused the behavior so that they can determine how they're going to change it. When you're working with a child, try to avoid the WH, why, what, where, in those with those specific approaches. Use concrete language. Show me how you feel. Point to how you feel. Touch the picture that shows me how you feel. To the right are some examples of this. How are you feeling? In an array of choices. A self-regulation, where am I on the scale of feeling good, feeling angry? To the bottom left is an even simpler, more portable system of how do you feel. And on the right is more of that, I'm evaluating where I am on this scale again. Visual reminders are always important. You know, what could the child do to calm down? And we talked earlier about where are they located. This is something that can be located throughout the room so that we're not, if a child is having difficulty, we're not now asking them to go across the room to access this visual checklist. Staff wearing visuals right on their body, on a lanyard, on a waistband little pull clip. Also, we talked a little earlier about sequence of events to help a child calm down. These are all simple visual reminders that can be posted throughout the room as well as on the individual student's body or with staff. Okay, the use of visuals during the debriefing process and following behaviors is very important. It's important for the teaching process. Questions to consider and to discuss with the student. What did the student do? When did the behavior happen? Where did the behavior occur? How did the student feel? What can the student do next time? To the right is a very basic representation, offers picture icons that allow the student to answer all of the questions that we listed. Again, here's just another example that answers the same questions of what happened, where did it happen, who are you with, what can I do next time. This tool is as important for the student to understand and utilize as it is for staff. When you look back on these, this is documentation that can help staff figure out when does a behavior likely happen. Then you're going to look at why. Maybe it's the way we're presenting. Maybe the child needs more visuals in that environment. So the debriefing tool can not only be used instructionally for the student, but it can be used in planning for the staff. Don't forget to review, restructure, and reteach. You need to ask yourself on a regular basis, do the tools work? Then talk about why they might not work. We've looked at visual prompts, teaching tools such as social stories, token boards. We've talked about whether the board is portable, non-portable. But you go back to also, we've mentioned multiple times through the presentation, that when you're teaching, you need to have an organized, structured approach so that the implementation is concise and very clear to the person assisting in the instruction as well as the child who is receiving the instruction. This is probably one of the biggest downfalls I see with us with supporting our students to develop more positive behaviors. We leave out the teaching portion. You cannot just introduce visuals without instructing staff and students how to use the visuals and what the purpose is. So, to kind of summarize what Amy and Tracey and I spoke about today, there's a planning checklist for supporting positive behaviors. And the behaviors are the most challenging barrier for most of our kids. And why? Because they do have trouble with language, communication, interpreting their environment, maneuvering around different environments. So what I want you to do when you're developing visuals for your classroom, as well as those individualized visuals, I want you to think about, what does the child need and what can I give the child in the physical environment that's going to promote reduced tension, less anxiety, and increase the likelihood that they're going to be able to demonstrate the behaviors that are most positive. Think about scheduling and predictability. When do I want to implement some of these visual strategies that are going to help behaviorally our kids handle changes in schedule, changes in the day? And remember, you have to teach that, oops, the schedule changes, because not everybody's schedule is going to stay the same every day. When you're looking at activities and instruction, what visuals does the child need behaviorally, communication-wise, to be able to respond and participate? Because if they can't respond and participate, then the actions we're going to get are not positive. Communication. How are they communicating? Their needs, their wants, their desires, their choices. And socialization. How can we, through visuals, through our environment, through the structure of the classroom, support socialization in the most positive manner so that our kids can not only recognize it, but can apply it and generalize it? That's the goal of visuals, is to help address situations in a systematic approach so that our students can identify, learn, generalize, and apply them. Tracey, Amy, and I would like to thank you for participating today and are happy to take any questions through the web board process. Thank you very much.